The summer heat rippled across the tarmac as Arielle Knox approached the shimmering glass tower of Helix Aerospace Technologies. Her boots, worn from years of manual work, clicked softly against the polished floor of the main lobby. No one paid her much attention, just another temp in oil-stained coveralls, clutching an old leather tool bag. But that tool bag wasn't just any tool bag. It had belonged to her father, Dr. Benjamin Knox, a brilliant black aerospace engineer whose name once echoed through the industry. That was until a test flight 18 years ago left him dead, and his legacy buried beneath vague corporate statements and sealed accident reports. Arielle had waited long for this moment, not for revenge, but for answers. The front desk receptionist barely hid her confusion as she scanned Arielle's badge. "You're here for the mechanic temp role?" she asked, her gaze flicking from Arielle's calloused hands to her calm, steady eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Arielle replied without hesitation. "I was told to report to Hangar 4. 20 minutes and 3 security checks later, Arielle stepped through the industrial doors into the heart of the facility, where Helix's pride and joy, the Falcon NX prototype, was being prepped for a major investor demonstration. Inside the hangar, white coats buzzed like flies around the jet. Technicians typed furiously, engineers murmured in jargon, and at the center of it all stood CEO Grant Mercer, a man whose tailored suit and diamond cufflinks gleamed just as hard as his ambition. "The Falcon NX," he proclaimed to a group of military officials and wealthy investors, "will redefine aerial dominance. 35% more thrust, 20% less fuel. No rival in the skies." Arielle observed from the edge, blending into the background like she'd always done, until a technician with a clipboard spotted her. "You must be the new hire," he said, sticking out his hand. "Nico Ramirez, systems tech." "Arielle Knox," she replied, gripping his hand firmly. "Well, welcome to the circus. You've arrived at the worst possible time." Before she could ask why, alarms blared. Red lights danced across the hangar as engineers scrambled toward the Falcon NX. Something was wrong with the engine. Very wrong. Grant's confident pitch began to crumble as he barked at his team. "Fix it! Now!" Arielle's eyes darted to the diagnostic monitors. She saw the problem in seconds. A pattern in the power spikes. It was familiar. Almost too familiar. "They don't know what they're looking at," she whispered to herself. "But I do." She took a quiet step forward. This wasn't just a test flight failure. This was her father's design, reborn and malfunctioning, and she was the only one in the room who knew why. The hangar grew tense as warning lights continued to flash. CEO Grant Mercer's voice tried to mask his frustration, but the sheen of sweat on his temple betrayed him. "Just a minor systems miscalibration," he told the investors with a forced chuckle. "These things happen." But Arielle knew better. Her eyes scanned the fuel intake diagnostics. She'd seen that pattern once, years ago when she was a teenager, sitting in her father's old workshop. He had been worried then, concerned about a system flaw no one else had taken seriously. And now that flaw had returned. "You're still here?" Nico asked, appearing at her side. "Honestly, I'd find an excuse to disappear. Grant's about to explode." "I know what's wrong," Arielle said, more to herself than him. "What?" "The intake mixture. The airflow's choking at the secondary valve. That's why the system can't stabilize ignition." Nico blinked. "You got that from across the room?" Arielle simply nodded. Moments later, Grant's voice rang out again. Louder now. "If any of you geniuses can actually fix this thing instead of standing around staring at it like a confused flock of birds, I'd be grateful." Silence. Then Arielle stepped forward. "I can fix it." Every head in the hangar turned. Grant slowly shifted his gaze to the woman in the greasy coveralls who dared interrupt him. His smile was slow, venomous. "And you are?" "Arielle Knox. I'm the new temp." Laughter erupted from a few nearby engineers. One of the older men muttered, "Did the janitor union expand into engine repair?" Grant raised a hand, silencing the snickers. "Miss Knox," he said with condescension dripping from every syllable, "this is a $200 million prototype powered by classified technology. We're not exactly servicing lawnmowers." "I don't need to touch your secrets," Arielle said calmly, but your diagnostic panels are screaming the problem. You've got a misaligned tertiary valve creating back pressure. The fuel mixture's rich and unstable. I'd bet your secondary compressor is on the verge of stalling. Another pause. Longer this time. One of the investors raised an eyebrow. Well, Grant, she seems to know her stuff. Grant hesitated, then smirked. All right, let's indulge the mechanic. Ms. Knox, if you're so confident, go ahead, show us. His voice was theatrical, smug. 5 minutes. If you fix it, I'll personally write you a letter of recommendation. To any garage you like. Nico turned to Arielle, stunned. Are you sure about this? But she was already moving. I'll need tools. Without waiting, he dashed to the supply bench and returned with a kit. Arielle popped the engine housing open, her hands moving with precision. The crowd watched, expecting a mess. But the mess never came. Instead, she worked quickly, efficiently, adjusting the intake flow, realigning the tertiary valve, and bypassing a faulty relay using an old-school technique only engineers with real field experience knew. 4 minutes and 40 seconds later, she stepped back. Try it now. Grant gestured to the lead systems engineer with a dramatic wave. The man punched in a sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine roared to life. Smooth, balanced, perfect. The diagnostics confirmed it. Optimal performance restored. The silence was deafening. Grant Mercer's jaw tightened. An investor clapped. Another followed. Then the colonel from the Air Force delegation nodded. Well, that was impressive, the colonel said. Where'd you learn that? Before Arielle could answer, Grant interrupted. Beginner's luck, he said quickly, but clearly resourceful. He turned to her. Let's see what you can do with an actual contract. Report tomorrow. You're now a consultant. It sounded like an opportunity, but Arielle heard the real message underneath. You just walked into a battlefield, and now we're watching you. Arielle arrived at Helix Aerospace the next morning with her father's tool bag and a mission burning in her chest. Gone was the element of surprise. Now every glance was cautious, calculating. She wasn't just a temp anymore. She was a disruption. Someone who had succeeded where others had failed. Nico greeted her at the edge of the hangar with a coffee in hand and a half smile. You're officially famous. The boardroom was buzzing last night. She accepted the coffee, but her eyes swept the room. They're not happy I'm still here. Nope, and Grant's definitely not thrilled. Nico leaned in. He assigned me to monitor your access today. Said it was standard protocol. I figured, Arielle replied. Throughout the morning, she was given menial calibration checks, tasks far below her demonstrated ability, but she did them with quiet precision, leaving no room for complaint, no mistakes to be used against her. Then came the slip-up. During a system diagnostic on the Falcon NX, Arielle noticed an anomaly in the pressure readings, one that didn't make sense for a ship supposedly in perfect shape. She traced it back to a configuration file that had been manually altered. Someone changed this, she murmured, double-checking timestamps. It had happened yesterday, while she'd been working in the archives with Nico. That night, she and Nico returned to the disused archival wing. He swiped his badge, and they slipped inside the darkened records room, where dusty file cabinets and out-of-date servers hummed faintly. What are we looking for? He asked. Anything from 2005 to 2007? Propulsion designs, testing logs, internal memos. Hours passed as they combed through files. Arielle's hands trembled slightly when she finally found it. An old schematic signed with a familiar set of initials, BK, her father's. It was unmistakably the foundation of the Falcon NX's current engine. Slightly updated, repackaged, renamed, but the architecture, the flow design, the safety override positioning, it was his. Arielle's voice cracked. They used his work. Not just used, Nico added, unfolding a second document. They removed his safety system. They rushed back to her apartment, joined by a third ally, Sasha Ray, a junior systems engineer who had grown suspicious after hearing whispers about unexplained system failures. We need to confirm everything, Sasha said. Get timestamps, code comparisons, and if possible, any voice logs. Nico nodded. There's a data module hidden in the auxiliary compartment of the Falcon. I've seen it during maintenance, but it's not listed on the schematics. The next evening, under the pretense of a routine check, Arielle accessed the compartment. Wedged between old wiring bundles was a dusty memory unit. It looked old, too old to belong in a modern prototype. She slipped it into her pocket. Back at her apartment, Nico and Sasha worked for hours to decrypt the corrupted data. Finally, through static and digital decay, a distorted voice broke through. If this module is active, I didn't authorize it. They're bearing what we built, what we died for. Arielle's hands froze. It was her father's voice. He had recorded a warning. Sasha leaned forward, whispering, he knew. He knew they were going to kill the project, and maybe kill him too. The room was silent for a long time. Then Arielle stood, spine straight. Grant Mercer was an intern at this company's predecessor when my father died. He was there. And now he's built his empire on a design stolen from a man who couldn't defend himself. Nico looked at her, concern in his eyes. If you go after him, he won't go quietly. I'm not expecting quiet, Arielle replied. I'm expecting truth. The next morning, Arielle submitted a request to access deeper systems in the company archive. It was denied. 3 hours later, her consultant clearance was frozen. An hour after that, she was summoned to the executive floor. Grant Mercer stood behind his glass desk, arms folded, the skyline stretching behind him like a throne room. Ms. Knox, he said coolly, let me be direct. You're not here to fix engines. You came here for something else. Arielle said nothing. You believe your father's designs were stolen. You believe I had something to do with it. But ask yourself this. What will you really gain if you keep going? Some headlines? Temporary outrage? You'll be discredited before the second paragraph. She stepped forward, voice low. I've already got the first one written. Grant narrowed his eyes. I've built this company from the ground up. What do you think happens if you pull out the cornerstone? I think it finally collapses under its own lies, she answered. As she turned to leave, Grant's voice followed her. You won't win, Ms. Knox. The world doesn't care about forgotten engineers. She paused at the door. Maybe not, but it remembers daughters who don't forget. The day after her confrontation with Grant Mercer, Arielle's security badge was disabled. Her access to company systems was revoked. Her workstation wiped. Her name quietly removed from the internal roster. It was supposed to be the end of her, but what Mercer didn't realize was he'd already lost control of the narrative. That morning, a tech journalist named Milo Ashford published a story that spread like wildfire. The Falcon NX is built on a dead man's genius, and his daughter has the proof. Milo had everything. Side-by-side design comparisons, timestamps of altered safety logs, and a partial audio file of Dr. Benjamin Knox predicting his own death. Social media erupted. Justice for Knox. Chalk Helix Truth. John March. Arielle knows. Inside Helix Aerospace. Chaos bloomed. Junior engineers began whispering, then forwarding emails, then leaking internal memos. One even sent Arielle security footage, grainy but clear, of Harold Trent, head of systems operations, accessing her terminal the night the Falcon nearly failed. And then came the black box data. Nico had been digging through an outdated off-network server Helix had long abandoned. In it, he discovered a fragment of the original flight log from Dr. Knox's fatal test 18 years ago. It showed everything. The override system had been disabled manually 36 hours before the crash, and the last person listed accessing that override? G. Mercer, engineering intern. When Arielle saw it, her hands trembled. I knew it, she whispered. He was there. He saw what it would cost, and he did it anyway. Sasha looked pale. This is enough to trigger a federal investigation. It's not just enough, Arielle replied. It's everything. That evening, under pressure from investors and a PR crisis spiraling out of control, Helix Aerospace announced an internal inquiry. But it wasn't enough, because the next day, Rick Donovan, the test pilot who had flown the Falcon NX, went live on national television. I was told to stay quiet, Rick said calmly, seated in a studio with the world watching. Told to say the failure was a minor glitch. He looked into the camera. But Arielle Knox's override system saved my life. The aircraft was compromised, and I believe someone inside Helix wanted it to fail. That statement hit harder than any article. The FAA announced it was reopening the case of Dr. Benjamin Knox. Congressional hearings were hinted at, whistleblowers lined up, and inside Helix, the board turned on Grant Mercer. In an emergency meeting, one Arielle and Milo live-streamed, the board moved to suspend Mercer indefinitely and appointed an interim CEO, Dr. Valerie Hume, a quiet aerospace veteran who had worked under Knox years ago. Mercer stormed from the building that night. The next morning, he was gone. Private jet, no flight plan filed, just vanished. But even in his absence, Arielle pressed on. She returned to the hangar, her badge reinstated by order of the new CEO, and was met not with mockery, but with applause. Engineers who once dismissed her now nodded with respect. Nico greeted her with a proud smile. And Harold Trent, he was nowhere to be seen. That night, as Arielle sat on the hood of her car outside the hangar, looking up at the stars her father once dreamed of reaching, she finally exhaled. It wasn't over, but the silence that had haunted her family for 18 years had finally been broken. "They buried you under blueprints and lies," she whispered, "but we dug you back out." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old photo, her, age 10, sitting in a cockpit beside her father, both of them laughing. "We're not done yet, Dad. Not even close." 6 months later, the Falcon NX was reborn, not as a monument to stolen ambition, but as a tribute to a man who'd once built aircraft in the quiet corners of a garage while humming jazz and explaining airflow to his wide-eyed daughter. The hangar looked different now. The old banners bearing Grant Mercer's face had been taken down. In their place stood a bronze plaque, in honor of Dr. Benjamin Knox, engineer, visionary, father. Innovation without integrity is failure in disguise. And beside it, another name, smaller but growing in recognition. Arielle Knox, Director of Design Integrity. She walked past the plaque every morning on her way to work, boots still scuffed, still carrying the same tool bag. But she walked taller now, not just because the truth had come out, but because she had finally stepped out of her father's shadow by finishing what he started. The Falcon NX had been renamed. Its new name? The Knox One. And today it would fly again. But not with a test pilot, with Arielle in the cockpit. "You sure about this?" Nico asked as he handed her the helmet. She smiled. "You worried?" "I'm always worried when someone tries to change the world." Arielle climbed in, flipped switches with fluid precision, and looked to the sky, clear, blue, endless. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted, Arielle felt the engines hum in harmony. No stalling, no malfunction, no silence, only forward. Above the clouds, she spoke softly into her headset. "You said the sky was the greatest challenge, Dad, but I think the truth was harder." She looked at the control panel, where she had tucked the same old photo, her and her father in the cockpit, all those years ago. "We flew, Dad. We finally flew."